So look, I love what revenue share did for real estate agents. I'm just not a fan of what it did to real estate agents. And that tension is why the conversation around it feels so divisive. I mean, some people swear by it, right? Others want nothing to do with it. But I don't think the conversation should be about whether revenue share is good or bad. It should be about three things. Number one, what mathematical problem revenue share was intended to solve? Number two, did it actually solve that problem? And number three, what was the blowback? The unintended, industry-wide consequences of its success for real estate agents. But to understand that third point, you have to understand why revenue share was created in the first place. Because long before revenue share existed, something had already changed. Agents weren't just selling homes anymore. They were growing the brokerage in public. On Facebook, on Instagram, on TikTok, on YouTube, via email, every post, every listing, every piece of marketing. Agents were creating new value for their brokerage, but the brokerage models had no way to compensate them for it. Not because they wanted to be unfair, because they weren't built to, they weren't designed to. The model only knew how to pay for one thing, which was closings. Not attention, not reach, not influence, not audience growth. That gap is the problem revenue share tried to solve. And understanding how it solved that problem is the only way to understand the new problem it created. And that is what we're going to cover in this video. So before revenue share, before caps, before cloud-based brokerages, real estate worked on a very simple trade. Agents paid into the brokerage, and the brokerage handled everything that agents could not. I mean, marketing was expensive. Distribution was centralized. Credibility lived with the brokerage brand, not the individual. Listings went in newspapers, in listing books, in the windows of the brokerage office. Phones rang at the brokerage, not on the agent's cell phone. So when agents paid splits and desk fees and marketing fees, they weren't being exploited. They were buying access. Access to credibility, distribution, infrastructure. And for that era, it was a fair exchange. But there was a limit that was baked into the model. An agent's upside was capped at one thing: close more deals this year. Not ownership, no residual from helping the brokerage expand. It wasn't malicious. It was just the way it was structured. And then came the internet, and something changed. It wasn't overnight, not all at once. Listings were online. Email replaced print. Social platforms replaced office windows. And slowly, the source of attention moved from the brokerage itself to the agent. Agents began building audiences, trust, visibility, influence, often without intending to. And without anyone formally deciding it, the roles were quietly flipping. Brokerages were no longer promoting the real estate agent. Real estate agents were promoting the brokerage. And agents began to feel it. Brokerages felt it too. Because now agents weren't just producing transactions. They were producing attention, reach, trust, momentum. They were building the kind of influence that used to be the brokerage's job. And none of that effort was showing up anywhere on their pay statements. So agents began moving. Because when the work changes, but the compensation system does not, people don't think about loyalty, they think about mobility. Brokerages felt that. Retention got harder. Switching became a more normal practice than it did before. Not because real estate agents suddenly lost character, because the model was still paying for the old value in a world where new value was being created every single day. And that imbalance is what forced the industry to really start experimenting with their models. See, first came higher splits. The logic was simple. If agents are creating more value, they should just keep more of their money. So agents paid less to the brokerage and took home more per deal. Then came caps. Once you've paid enough into the brokerage system, you should stop paying. Caps lowered the ceiling on cost, but again, they only changed what happened after a closing. The extra value agents were creating every day still had nowhere to land. Then came desk fee and fee for service models. Pay for what you use. Don't pay for what you don't. Cleaner, leaner, more efficient, but still, they made deals cheaper. They didn't make contribution visible. Each of these models fixed something real. They reduced friction. They improved margins. They gave real estate agents more control. They adjusted cost. They never adjusted credit. Agents were still being paid for the same thing they always had been: closings, not attention, not reach, not influence, not growth, not retention, not training. So the industry kept moving, not because these ideas were bad, because they weren't enough. But eventually, the industry had to try something different, because by now it was obvious. The issue wasn't just what agents paid, it was what agents were producing that never showed up anywhere on their pay statements. So the first serious attempt to fix that was profit share, not revenue share. And profit share was a big shift because it was the first time a brokerage model said out loud, agents don't just create value at closings. They can create value at the company level too. In other words, maybe this other work should count. So profit share tried to do that. If the company grows and there's profit, agents who helped grow it participate in that profit. It sounded fair, and it was fair in principle. But profit share had a built-in problem. Profit is what's left over, and what's left over changes for reasons the real estate agent couldn't control. The rent goes up, staffing changes, overhead expands, leadership decisions shift. Expenses got categorized differently. One office was running tight and another office was running heavy. So two agents can do the same other work, build culture, attract people, retain talent, grow presence, and still get totally different outcomes. So profit share, it got the right idea. It finally tried to make the other work count, but it tied the payout to a number agents couldn't predict and couldn't influence directly, which meant it was hard to scale and hard to believe in consistently. And that's why the industry had to try again, had to keep evolving. So the industry needed something simple, a way to reward contribution that didn't change by the office, didn't change by overhead, didn't change by location. That pressure is what pushed the next evolution. And that's where revenue share comes in. Revenue share wasn't created to be clever, it was created to be consistent. Here's the difference. Profit share pays from what's left, revenue share pays from what's predefined. With revenue share, every closing creates a known company dollar. That dollar exists before rent, before staff, before office decisions. And revenue share simply decides how that dollar gets distributed. So two agents could do the same work in two different places and get the same results. Not because one office was run better, not because overhead was lower, because the rule did not change. That's why revenue share scaled. It finally gave the industry a way to pay the same contribution the same way everywhere. And from a math standpoint, which is what they were trying to solve, it worked. And because it worked, it spread fast. But the mathematical success, it came with a new cost that no one had accounted for. You see, when a system succeeds at scale, it does more than create organizational growth. It starts shaping behavior. What matters, what progress looks like, what doing it right feels like. And revenue share did exactly that, slowly. It began to change how agents measured their own success. Agents entered growth modes before production was stable, before operations were clean. So roles began collapsing: producer, leader, builder, recruiter, not as a choice, but as a single expectation. And that's where the drift started. Agents who were doing incredibly well at their actual job, selling real estate, could still feel like they were somehow behind, not because their production was weak, because the scoreboard had changed. So agents began making a quiet trade. They invested time and energy into work that paid later, while still carrying the financial reality of a commission-based business that needs to pay now. And the cost showed up in distraction, in dilution, in burnout, in quiet regret. Not because revenue share was evil, but because the system rewarded contribution without protecting timing and blurred contribution into identity. That's the problem the math couldn't account for. And here's the real issue. Production pays now, revenue share can pay later. But the models didn't protect the order, and that's where things went wrong. The problem wasn't revenue share, the problem was treating future reward like present income and collapsing an agent's identity the day they walked through the revenue share doors. They weren't just a producer anymore, they were expected to be everything. So agents were being asked to invest time, focus, and energy into something that could pay later, while production was still responsible for funding the business today. And that's the distinction that most models missed. And that's where the next evolution spawned from, and it's called hybrid share.